Hey, welcome to the show. I'm your host, Dr. Joseph Koppas, and I'm joined by my guest, Dr. Mike T. Nelson today, who wants to talk today about heart rate variability. Good morning, Dr. Mike.
Hi, how are you doing today?
Doing pretty well. Uh,
Good.
so tell us a little bit about what you do.
Yeah, I kind of do a wide variety of stuff. I primarily work in more of the exercise physiology nutrition area. And so currently I'm a faculty member at the Carrick Institute. So I helped with their human performance program and working on some other stuff with them right now, which has been fun. I also teach currently right now I teach online for Georgia Southern University and Rocky Mountain University. And then I have my own business here in Minnesota. So I do some in-person testing of exercise physiology, either weight training or aerobic stuff. I've got a metabolic cart, Moxie, heart rate, a bunch of other fun stuff to play around with. I actually converted my garage into a gym slash sort of testing lab and freezer that you're going to fill this coming week with cold water to do some fun cold water immersion and some other stuff like that. And most of my clients are actually online. So I do online training with that. I have a certification, which is a Flex Diet cert. And then I do some online work from Dr. Jeremy Schmo's office here in the Twin Cities. So people will come in for kind of a 1 week intensive with him. And then I'll work with them online when they kind of go back to wherever they're at. We'll monitor heart rate variability and just kind of check in, making sure they're doing their drills. And if it's a real basic question, might answer it, but at least I know enough to know what I know and know what I don't know. So I can then be like, no, you got to go talk to him about that stuff. I have no idea what you just said.
That's great. So where would you say that your initial interest in exercise physiology and physiology in general really stemmed from?
Probably growing up, I used to say some issues. I had open heart surgery when I was 4.5. So I had a atrial septal defect. So in 1978, there's only like a couple centers that were actually doing open heart surgery on kids that young. University of Minnesota Children's happened to be one of them. So I had that procedure done in 1978. Luckily, I've never had any complications or any issues after that. Never been on any medication or anything. Also had some eye issues. I had lazy eye, strabismus. Didn't know about any of this, how it would affect anything, until probably like my mid-20s or so. Went to college, just started doing exercise. I'm 6'3" at that time, still in college, weighed 156 pounds, kind of looked like an eel-shaped rake. So I'm like, oh, maybe I should do some weight training stuff. And I'd always been interested in exercise physiology and biology. I did my undergrad at St. Scholastica in Duluth, Minnesota. And that was one of the very few places at the time you could do an undergraduate class and actually work on cadavers for anatomy and physiology. So I just started taking anatomy and physiology stuff basically for fun. I did a master's in mechanical engineering, biomechanics, and literally took a 400 level exercise physiology class just for fun, for free elective. I never got done, worked for a medical device company for a while, and then did about 5 years in a PhD program in biomedical engineering, and then ended up dropping out of that and did my PhD actually in exercise physiology. So it's kind of always been there and something I've been interested in, and then just guess kind of later in life just made it a full-time career.
Very nice, very nice. So for those in the audience that aren't familiar with what heart rate variability is, can you tell us exactly what that is and why it's important?
Yeah, so I think the main thing is it's a non-invasive way of measuring the status of your autonomic nervous system. And for the docs in the audience, they'll know what that is. For other people listening who may not be familiar with the term, it's a balance of what's called parasympathetic and sympathetic arms of the nervous system. So how I explain it to clients is the parasympathetic nervous system is like the brake pedal on your car. If you step harder on your brake, the car is going to slow down. So if we increase parasympathetic tone, or what's called vagal tone, that kind of output from the parasympathetic side, it's like pushing down on the brake of your car. It's going to put more force into the brake pedal, but the car is going to slow down. So your heart rate and other things are going to change. Heart rate especially is going to slow down. The sympathetic side is like stepping on the gas pedal of the car. Step on the gas pedal, you're going to increase stress a little bit more, but the car is going to go a little bit faster. So heart rate's going to elevate. Some other things, maybe acute performance will go up a little bit depending on what you're looking at. So that's the autonomic nervous system in simple terms. And what heart rate variability does, it's a non-invasive measure that people can now actually do at home or almost anywhere. And it tells us the status of what's going on with the autonomic nervous system. How much are you on the parasympathetic side, and how much are you on the sympathetic side? So at a very high level, it's giving us a pretty good marker of how much stress your body is under, at least from the side of the nervous system.
Okay. And you said that a lot of people can measure this at home. There's a lot of, I would say, a lot of devices out there right now that say that they're measuring heart rate variability. What are some that you trust and would recommend to people?
Yeah, there's a bunch of them now. I'm kind of still pretty old school. I like still having the electrical signal. So if you have like a polar heart rate strap or a heart rate strap you put on, the main one I use is from a company called iThlete. So instead of athlete, it's iThlete. They've got some documentation that's been peer reviewed showing that it is accurate. You can buy a special finger sensor from them. Some of the dedicated sensors are pretty accurate. Or you can just pair it to a heart rate strap and it'll go to your phone. I think the app's like $8 or something like that. And it's pretty darn accurate. And it gives you also context. So you can report how is your sleep, how is your nutrition, and they're just little slider switches. So that's the one I use most often with clients. I do have an Oura ring, so I do use that with some clients. Oura is a little bit different, that it is looking at a pressure reading, but it's off of the finger. And the vessel in the finger is a pretty good way to get measurements of that, even though you're looking at a surrogate of an electrical signal. It's pretty darn accurate in terms of that. They've got a study published in the journal Sleep on it. The downside with Oura and the difference is that Oura is accumulating HRV data over the course of the night. Maybe they'll change that. So I think it gives you a good idea of kind of a ballpark of where you're at. If you're looking at more performance or acute changes, things of that nature, the iThlete, you have to do a one-time measurement in the morning. It takes about 2 to 5 minutes. So in terms of compliance, it's a little bit more of a pain because you have to do something else. But of the current literature, that's probably going to be a little bit more accurate at trying to pick out changes from day to day. So I have clients who use both. Like I said, I think Oura is a good average. It has some other cool features. But for trying to make day-to-day changes, I still like using the iThlete. A lot of the sports literature is kind of based off of more just a single point measurement first thing in the morning. There's I lost track now of how many devices are doing heart rate variability. I know Apple Watch does it, a bunch of other ones. Anything that's on the wrist right now, yeah, I'm pretty leery of, because trying to pull accurate data off the wrist, I'm not convinced that it's possible yet. Maybe someone has some data they could send me to change my mind. Because to do HRV, you need to be within pretty close milliseconds of where that little R wave peak is. I'm not convinced you can get that kind of fidelity off of an optical measurement off of the wrist yet, but maybe that'll change.
Gotcha. And you had mentioned that heart rate variability is a good measurement of the autonomic nervous system, and that's something you monitor with your patients and clients. Is this something that just everybody should be, looking at day to day, or is, there a particular population or subset of symptoms that you might really want to focus on having that client look at their heart rate variability?
Yeah, I think it's useful for most people I work with. So even if I have more general population clients, because I still have a few, my clients are all pretty varied, from relatively higher level performance to trainers to a few general population. And I initially started doing it more in athletes because I'm like, we'll use this to kind of look at your recovery because I'm only doing it online. I don't have an idea of how your movement is or other kind of metrics. And asking you every day how you feel, people just tend to zone out and not report super accurate over time. Can be useful, but takes a little bit of training. And then going back, I started this probably about 7 years ago now. I'm like, well, I'll just try doing it in everybody because I want to get more data to see what's going on. And what I found was in general population clients, it was a lot more useful because people were kind of oblivious to what their stress level was. And once you actually have a marker of that, I was using it primarily just to drive awareness. And then I would use that then to look at other factors of nutrition or sleep. And instead of kind of arguing with someone, for example, about their sleep, I would just plot their self-report of sleep, or I would pull some other metric like from their watch or what time they went to bed, what time they got up, look at their total duration of sleep, and then I would just do a simple graph with that and their heart rate variability. And you would see that their hours of sleep would go down and their stress level would go up. And then I used to argue with clients about it. And then I just started sending them pictures of this. I'm like, hey, what do you think's going on? They're like, oh my God, you mean like when I sleep less, I get more stressed? That's crazy. And it's like, it seems like so like blinding flash of the obvious. We had like these conversations before and they, cognitively agree. Oh yeah, I definitely agree. But there's something about seeing the actual data from their system and their physiology that it became a lot more real for them. And so then they would ask, oh, what should I do about this? And I had to kind of refrain from being like, yeah, you remember those 3 months we spent talking about this? Like, probably do those things. So I think it's useful in most people. It doesn't mean you have to do it the rest of your life, but I think to get an idea of where your awareness level is, and if you've got like performance or something else you're trying to work around, you can look for associations there too. You may find some stuff that may be helpful.
Absolutely. And you mentioned sleep problems potentially being one indicator. What are some other maybe signs that people's autonomic nervous systems may be off, or their heart rate variability may be off?
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of stuff. I mean, obviously you can get into things that they would show up in your clinic for from, orthostatic intolerance. Like, so if you get up super fast in the morning, you feel like a little dizzy, lightheaded, obviously you want to check with your doctor about what's going on with that. Yeah, it's kind of a myriad of things. I think what's most useful too is that, so like I said, I do some stuff with Dr. Jeremy Schmoll's office here. And so we're using it because, some of the clients want to get back doing very light exercise, especially some aerobic training in a stable environment. But, they still have some neural work that they're working on, and their brain is changing, their body is changing. And it's really easy without some type of cross-check to just bury them right away. And you don't really know where their capacity is. And sometimes it can change day to day too. So I like using heart rate variability at least as a marker of, hey, we just had you do some really simple, low intensity nasal breathing cardio, for just 10 minutes a day, maybe on a rower so it's stable, or on a stationary bike so head's not moving around, that type of thing. And, first 3-4 days looks good. And then all of a sudden, oh, wow, you're getting a lot more stressed here. So maybe let's drop it to 5 minutes for a couple days. Oh, okay, that was good. Or, yeah, everything looks pretty stable. You feel good. You're doing your drills. Everything's cool. All right, next week, let's go to 12 minutes and see how that goes. So it kind of gives you a little bit, I don't want to say necessarily an early warning, but an idea of, how hard are you really pushing someone? Both maybe I can go a little bit more aggressive, or maybe I need to pull back. And you don't necessarily kind of have to reach that threshold of, oh, yeah, in hindsight, yeah, we really torched you, and I'm sorry you feel like crap now for 5 days. So it kind of gives you a little bit more data of looking at what is the response of their system to whatever it is you're doing.
Mm-hmm. And so you were obviously monitoring HRV during exercise in a lot of these neuro patients moving forward.
Yeah, we would just do it one time in the morning. So we get a baseline marker, and then we'd have whatever they're doing for exercise during the day.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So do you use exercise in order to help as a therapy for the autonomic nervous system as well?
Yeah, I think it, especially lower level aerobic training. Obviously, there's tons of benefits to strength training, but some people position wise are not able to do that for a while. Some people are, again, just highly variable, depending on what they have going on. But what I've noticed is, and you might be more familiar with the literature than I am, but a lot of the people just seem to be very deconditioned. And I don't know if that's because some of the issues that they're working on, or the fact that they had issues for so long that they were just not able to exercise because they got extremely symptomatic, or I don't know. I don't. I've talked to some other people. I don't know if we really understand the full. But we do know that especially aerobic training can be helpful for secretion of like BDNF, right? It's a brain-derived neurotrophic factor. We do know it's associated with hippocampal volume. And at a really just basic level, I think that gets missed a lot, even in the fitness world. Like we're just all kind of walking around most of the time using what's called aerobic metabolism, right? So we're primarily, ideally, using fat as a fuel, and that's the main way we're converting oxygen into energy. And if that level, let's say hypothetically, your max, your red line is 30, and let's just say hypothetically you're walking around and it takes 20 to do that, you're kind of getting close to that red line just all the time by your daily activities. Compared to someone else just to say their VO2 max is 50, day-to-day activities is just hypothetically 20, which I know it's probably high. But now you've got like a really big buffer. Like you can kind of go up, you can go for a run, you can probably handle a little bit more stress, and you're going to be okay, right? And you're probably going to feel a lot better because you're running at a very low percentage of what your capacity is. Or if you're kind of constantly bumping up against that red line all the time, you're going to feel really tired, you're going to feel drained, you're not probably going to feel very good because in essence your body is working really hard. So I think by pulling that level up kind of gives you a lot bigger buffer and a lot more room. And then everything from that is also a much lower percentage of that. So you're literally making like day-to-day life easier.
Mm-hmm. Very good. In addition to that, when you're looking at like a performance, you said you teach the human performance program for the Carrick Institute. When you're looking at athletes and people who want to really accelerate their performance, how important is looking at HRV, and what kind of benefits can that provide the athlete?
I'm biased. I mean, I think it's useful. I use it more as a way of what is the response of the system. And we also differentiate, are you looking at aerobic performance or are you looking at weight training performance? There's some data that for prediction of trying to predict how well you'll do on aerobic performance, HRV is okay. It's not like the best thing in terms of prediction of acute performance, but it's okay. In terms of weight training, it's actually pretty horrible for prediction of performance in terms of, hey, here's my HRV score today. It's green, which, today's going to be an amazing day in the gym. Or it's red. It's really screwed. Today's going to suck. Those correlations don't really line up well at all. And that's probably because everybody's had this experience where if they're lifting, they've had bad sleep, they've had maybe 3 hours of sleep, their nutrition was crap, they drag their lazy carcass to the gym, they get there, it takes twice as long to do their warm-up. Oh, wow, and then performance for that day was actually pretty good. Oh, weird. So we can buffer a fair amount of fatigue, and so I think prediction isn't always going to be the best marker. And consequently, if you have someone who's very parasympathetic, like kind of out of the normal range, that will actually show a decrease in their performance, right? Because you need some of that sympathetic drive to get a higher level of performance acutely. But even back to that day where you're only getting 3 hours of sleep, you're not really going to expect to hit PRs in the gym, personal records, like every time you go to the gym now, right? And that's kind of the way HRV is. If you're showing that, man, your body's just redlining it like every day, at some point you're just going to walk right off the cliff, right? So I use it as, how is your body responding, at least as a stress level on the autonomic nervous system, to what we're doing. And there's a little bit of delays in there, and you can get into looking at daily metrics and a weekly average and a bunch of other stuff that gets kind of complicated. But especially online, I find having some response of the system that's not necessarily training performance, I find is super useful. You could look at resting heart rate. I think that's okay. It's not quite as accurate, but it's better than nothing. There's some other metrics that have been proposed that are like tap tests and stuff like that. I'd say are kind of mixed. In a perfect world, right, you're primarily going to be guided by performance. You could look at vertical jump in relation to performance on that day. But not everyone's going to do that. Not everyone has equipment to grade their vertical jump and that type of thing either. So I like using a mixture of performance, right? How did they do both number wise in the gym and how did they feel? And with the HRV, with the athlete one, they'll report sleep and nutrition and all these other kind of self reports, and they can put little comments in there. I think if you're working with someone in person every single day, HRV probably not all that useful. But if you're online, I find that having that extra bit of data and looking to see how stressed their system is very helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And last part, if you get into advanced cases where maybe you're looking at someone who's trying to peak for a meet or powerlifting event or CrossFit event or obstacle course race, I may want to kind of push their stress levels a little bit high and then have them recover and then have them super compensate a little bit on the day that they need to perform. And for me, I'd like having some other markers to kind of know where we're at in that curve because, you've got an average of where people are at from experience, but everyone's going to respond a little bit different to that too.
Absolutely. You had mentioned nutrition earlier, and you said you worked a lot with nutrition and diet. How important is diet in the overall scheme of stress response in looking at this?
It's super important. The hard part is there's like massive variability from one person to the next.
Mm-hmm.
I remember early on I got some data from two top level track athletes, and the coach was like, "Hey, you got to work with these two athletes." I'm like, "Okay, fine." And at the time I was like, "Oh man, I'm really nervous. Like I don't know if there's anything I can do that it can improve them from a nutrition standpoint." And I'm like, "Okay, just get a 3-day log, what they're eating, just send it to me. We'll look at it." And I look at it and I'm like, 70% of it is like fast food and just very, very low quality. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, were they traveling? Was there something going on? Oh no, this is not traveling at home. It's like, oh my God. And then on the flip side, it's like, wow, you're doing that well eating what I would say is a very low quality intake. Mm-hmm. And that's, some freaks are just freaks. And so there's exceptions to the rule. But so I'd say it's very variable. Obviously, it has a huge importance. Everything from the amount of calories you take, what you're trying to do for your sport. Are you more an endurance athlete? Are you more a strength and power in terms of macronutrients? Micronutrients, again, are super important. I think a lot of athletes tend to forget about that. I would say they're more important for long-term performance, not necessarily maybe short-term performance. But if we go even deeper and look at, how the mitochondria makes ATP from using different fuels and stuff in the body, having all your little cofactors and your B vitamins and zinc and everything else are going to be super important for that. So I'd say it definitely plays a big role. The other hard part too is that even for, athletes or just everyday people, nutrition is one of those weird things where you're always having to eat. So you're trying to modify something that they've got pretty good unconscious competence in, right? So a lot of times it's just providing them awareness of, hey, maybe you should have more vegetables, and that's what we're going to track this week, or you probably need more protein, or whatever it is. It's kind of it's a weird thing, because in the past, I used to argue with people about nutrition. So they're like, oh, my nutrition's great. I'm like, oh, okay. And then I just said, just fill out this dietary log and then come back. And they're like, oh my God, my nutrition's horrible, right? Because they became very not knowing really what they were eating on a day-by-day basis. Mm-hmm. So I think for me, a lot of it's just education and kind of pointing people in the right direction. And most people are probably not going to make massive wholesale changes to their nutrition overnight. Some people will, but it's more of a slow-term process of just kind of constantly tweaking it and then seeing how they do with it.
Yeah, that can be one of the toughest things to really change in someone's lifestyle. But as we talked about, it can be very important. But
it makes a big difference if you can do it. It's the reason I was kind of hesitating is because there's huge amount of variability, mm-hmm. and as you know, like getting people to actually do changes. I mean, that's a lot of work, right? Yeah. And obviously I do that online, but some clients I'm literally talking to them at least once a week, sometimes every other day. Mm-hmm. And I think having someone there for that level of accountability is probably what's going to be needed in some form.
Yeah,
Otherwise, people just kind of tend to revert back to their habits.
absolutely. So, Dr. Mike, we're just about out of time, but I wanted to make sure we budgeted enough time at the end for you to give us any final thoughts that we may not have been able to cover so far in the show.
Yeah, I mean, I would say final thoughts if people are listening. I do think heart rate variability is a good tool. I think it can be useful. Caveat there, yeah, probably just make sure you're measuring it the correct way. If you use an Aura, it'll do it automatically for you overnight, and I think there can be some use to that, to especially getting you kind of in the ballpark of where you're at. I like using the iThlete system, and most people are going to do that first thing in the morning. If you need to use the bathroom, go use the bathroom, sit down, put the chest strap or little finger sensor on. Most people, again, are going to do that in a seated position, especially if you're an athlete. Seated's probably going to be better. If you have a crazy low heart rate, like below 50 or in the low 40s or 30s, standing may be a little bit better. But that's probably going to be a rare exception with that. And then just monitor it each day and see what you find. And then take a period of time. So I'm going to do that for 4 weeks going forward. I'm going to fill out my little context things, and then go back and look at it and see what did you find. So with clients, I'll have them run that for 4 to 6 weeks. Then I'll go back and retroactively kind of look to see, oh, what kind of associations do we find? Oh, wow, whenever you did a strength and power day, it dropped for 48 hours and then came back up. Okay, that's probably good to know if we're going to set up your program. Or, oh, wow, there's a couple of nights you got less sleep. Wow, that really impacted you. Or other stuff like people put in notes, had an argument with my spouse, HRV tanks. Oh, so emotional things like that. So a lot of it is just providing a level of awareness for them.
Mm-hmm.
And then for the next block of time, we'll pick kind of the top one or two and be like, oh, okay, it looks like sleep is a big factor here. Now let's do some type of intervention for sleep, and let's see if that changes your HRV. You can kind of run that as a iterative process then going forward. So a lot of people, as soon as you start measuring something, they just like start changing everything. And that's fine as long as they're making good changes. I don't think that's really a negative per se.
Mm-hmm.
But I like kind of a little bit more systematic approach of trying to figure out what are the big things. Let's kind of work on them. We'll get a marker to see if we're going in the right direction, and then we'll take the next thing down and just keep working that forward.
Very good. And if a client wanted to reach out to you or learn more about you or what you do, how would they do that?
Yeah, best place is just going to be the website, which is just miketnelson.com. So MIKETNELSON. They go to the top part there. They can get on the newsletter. So most of the information I send out is through the newsletter, and it's free to get on there. So that'd be the best way. And then if they're, a trainer, healthcare professional, or someone else that's interested in how do you actually set up a nutrition and kind of recovery plan or system for your patients or clients, or depending on what your licensure is, that would be the Flex Diet certification. They can get more information about that at flexdiet.com, FLEXDIET.com.
Very good. Well, thank you for being on the show this morning and sharing your expertise with us. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Of course. And this has been your host, Dr. Kappas. Be well.